All right. So on my first visit to Ireland, I walked into a souvenir shop and, I was just looking for something to remember the wonderful time that we had here with my family. So I'm browsing the aisles of clover keychains and sheep earrings, just enthralled by the cuteness of it all. And a woman walks up to me and says, "You okay?" And I kind of paused, confused why she would ask me that. But I said, "I'm fine, thanks." And she smiled and walked away. So a few minutes later, I wander into another souvenir shop, and this time a man comes up to me and asks, "You all right?" And immediately I begin to panic. I mean, am I pale? Like, do I have early stage food poisoning and I don't recognize it yet? I mean, two perfect strangers just came up to me and asked if I'm all right, so obviously something must be wrong. As the man continued to stand there waiting for a response, slowly it dawned on me that perhaps what made most sense is that in Ireland, asking, "You all right?" is what in my culture a shopkeeper would phrase as, "May I help you?" So in hindsight, this is humorous and harmless. But when this same dynamic of words having different meanings happens at work, the stakes are a lot higher. So the question I want to address today is, when we're working across cultures, how do we bridge this communication gap? So whether you're communicating your brand to a client or you're working with a teammate from another cultural background, these cultural differences are sometimes not just an awkward faux pas, but they can actually confuse, frustrate, and break trust in the relationships that matter most. So today I want to introduce you to cultural intelligence, which is a research-backed framework for relating and working effectively across cultures. And specifically, I want to give you 2 actions that you can use today to help you be more effective communicating across cultures. My commitment to you is that this session will be interesting, it will be actionable, and it'll expand your perspective on how to communicate with people from different backgrounds. So maybe tell you a bit about myself. I've spent my entire life living and working between cultures. And currently I live in Turkey, but I work with people from over 40 countries around the globe. And my work specifically helps leaders and teams develop the skills they need to be effective across cultures. So a few years ago, I met an American businesswoman who already had a successful company with hiring consultants from her own cultural background. But when I met her, she was just about to start a new venture in Turkey. She was going to hire a mostly local team. As we got to talking, she was like, "Oh, we should do culture training. That would be interesting." But as time goes on, things happen, and I didn't hear from her again until 6 months later, when she wrote me a desperate message asking for help. So when we got on, she started telling me about how she had hired a Turkish manager. They'd been working really hard, hand in hand, to get this business off the ground. But she found that sometimes, as they were working together, she would say something and he would react in an unexpected way, or he would do something that she didn't feel was quite in line with how she wanted to work. And with time, that got worse until one day they began yelling at each other. It ended when the manager threw the company car keys at her and stormed off the property. And that's when she called me. So we talked together through the cultural dynamics that were going on, the differences, the blind spots that she wasn't aware of that impacted their communication and collaboration. Unfortunately, by that point, it was too late to save the relationship with the manager, so she signed his termination papers and then came and joined a cultural intelligence workshop. Afterwards, when I followed up with her, I asked how it was going, and she said, "I use cultural intelligence every single day." She was using it to lead her multicultural team, to serve her international clients, and 5 years later, that business is still successful. So it's often at this point when I talk about the need for culture training, the number one pushback I hear is people say, yeah, I mean, culture, that's cool and all, but really? We just need to respect each other. As long as we respect each other, everything else will work out. So I'd like to invite you to do a physical activity with me. So I'll show you what we're going to do, and then I'll ask you to do it with me. And it's going to give us a different perspective on looking at this pushback. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that there's a clock on the ceiling above our heads. And we're going to trace with our finger from 12 to 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 to 3 to 6 to 9. And as we do this, we're slowly going to bring our finger down on a level with our head, on a level with our shoulder, and on a level with our waist. Okay? Pretty simple. Two things. One is make sure your finger's always pointing straight up, because otherwise there's a tendency to point to the back of the person in front of you. So we're always pointing straight up. And then the second thing is never stop turning, okay? Always keep your finger turning. Are we agreed? Okay. So if you would stand up with me. I know some of the rows here are close, so if you can't, that's all right. But we're going to point to the clock on the ceiling above our heads. And we're going to trace from 12 to 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 to 3 to 6 to 9. And as we do that, we're slowly going to bring our finger down on a level with our head, always pointing up, on a level with our shoulder, and slowly bring it down on a level with our waist. Now don't stop turning, but look down at your finger and tell me what direction it's turning. Counterclockwise? Wait, did you stop and go the other way? So what happened? What changed? Perspective. So when your finger is up above your level, above your eye line, it's turning in a clockwise direction. When that same movement comes below your eye line, it appears to be turning counterclockwise. You're welcome to sit down. So perspective taking means understanding that two people can be presented with the exact same information, the same message, and come away with radically different interpretations of what it meant. So here's the thing. If you and I are having a conversation, I will make direct eye contact with you the entire time, because to me, that communicates that I'm listening, I'm paying attention, and I care about what you have to say. To me, that's respectful. But if you're communicating with someone who's Japanese or Indian, this kind of direct eye contact, especially with someone who's older or in a position of authority, can actually symbolize challenge or aggression. So when we're working across cultures, the problem is usually not a lack of respect. It's that we understand respect differently. So that's why we need cultural intelligence. So cultural intelligence is based on over 20 years of academic research that's been conducted all over the world. And it's driven by the question, what's the difference between people and organizations who succeed in our multicultural, globalized world and those that fail? And this is based in intelligence research, which is why, just like IQ and EQ, we call this CQ. So I'm going to briefly introduce this framework to you. It has 4 capabilities that they've identified as differentiating people who succeed across cultures. So the first capability is motivation. They're interested about people who are different from themselves, and they're persistent when those difficulties inevitably arise. They also have information about similarities and differences between cultures. And then they strategically use that information to plan for, prepare for, and learn from cross-cultural interactions. And finally, The fourth capability is behavior, the ability to actually change the way that you speak or act when it's needed. So these are the 4 capabilities that they've identified through research. And they have 13 subdimensions, which we're not going to get into today. Instead, I want to give you 2 actions that you can use immediately to communicate better with anyone from a different background. So if you think back to the businesswoman from the US, what was the first step that led her to a breakthrough? It was when she got curious about understanding the cultural background of the person she was working with. Culture shapes our assumptions and our expectations of things like who makes decisions, how are they made, what does it mean to be a professional, right? Just how we communicate and how we work. And so getting curious both helps us realize our own assumptions and also opens our eyes to assumptions and expectations that others can have. So how exactly do we get culturally curious? How do we do this? So the first place to start is identifying who is it most relevant for you to learn more about. Is it a client? Is it a colleague? Is it a campaign you have in another culture? So once you've identified that, then leverage resources for perspective. So, in our digital age, we have so many resources right at our fingertips. I think it was this morning, Edgar said there would probably not be any sessions today that talk about AI. I love to rise to a challenge. So I will leave this here at all the different resources you can leverage. But let me share with you 3 areas that I get curious about when I'm learning about another culture. One thing I get curious about is communication style. How do people from this culture normally prefer to communicate with each other? I also look at how do they interact with hierarchy? How do they interact with authority? And finally, I look at how do people in this culture build trust? So for working relationships, these are 3 critical areas to understand about cultural differences. And then finally, learning from locals. Information is great, but there's really no substitute for the human connection and talking to people. So whether that's communication with the person themselves, or whether that's bringing in someone from outside who can give you a perspective. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of speaking with Felicia, the APAC chair for AMEC, and we were talking about how sometimes she helps localize campaigns to the Indonesian context. So this is a really great way that you can get more insight into a cultural perspective. So learning from locals. I'll also mention that when we're doing research or a campaign in another cultural context, one thing that's critical is integrating a culture check into our process. Because just as the way that we speak and interact is shaped by cultural assumptions, culture also shapes our tools. It shapes how we gather data and how we interpret data. Now, I know sometimes we don't like that because we like to think that it's numbers, it's facts, it's above culture, but actually our cultural assumptions shape how we understand and approach these things. So as an example, let's talk about the focus group format. So the focus group is based on a certain set of cultural assumptions that people will feel comfortable sharing personal opinions in a group setting, and that it's okay to disagree. Now, in contexts like much of Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, these hierarchical collectivist cultures actually bend toward consensus. So that means people are more likely to agree with the group, and people who have dissenting views are less likely to speak up. So that significantly shapes what kind of conclusions you can accurately draw from focus group formats conducted in these regions. So integrate a culture check into your processes. So getting curious, gathering information, that's all well and good. It helps us spot the culture gap before the differences explode in our face. But gathering this information doesn't do us much good unless we actually use it, right? So our next step is using our cultural insights to strategically adjust our approach through cultural adaptation. And cultural adaptation, we can start by first clarifying our intent. What is it that I'm trying to communicate here? Am I trying to communicate confidence, friendliness, value to the client, right? What is it exactly that I'm trying to get across? And then once you've identified that, ask, now how do I communicate that message in this cultural context, right? So leverage those curiosity insights. And I'll give you a couple examples here of adapting for success. A German CFO working in Russia needed to get insight from his team for decisions that he had to make. So he'd call his team together and he'd say, here's what I want to talk about, here's my thoughts, but I need to hear your insights. After a while, he realized that his team always seemed to agree with whatever it was he said. So he talked to some people and did some research and realized that in hierarchical Russian culture, people were reluctant to contradict the leader, especially in front of other people. So he made one small change. When he called his team together, he said, here's what I want to talk about. I want to hear your thoughts and insights. And he left his personal opinion for last. And this way, he was able to get all that critical info that he needed. Another example is a Brazilian leader who had his first assignment leading a team from 12 different nationalities. A year in, he was surprised to find out that his team felt that he was displeased with them. So through a cultural consultation, he came to realize that it was his lack of emotional expressiveness that left his team unsure about how to read his reactions. So he decided he was going to smile more often when he was happy with his team. As a result, he came to be seen as a better leader, was promoted 3 times in the next few years, and is now in a global leadership position. So cultural adaptation doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes small, practical adjustments can significantly impact the way you're perceived and the ability to get the results that you want. So before we move on to the conclusions, I was thinking about our time here at the AMEX Summit. And what an amazing resource we have here. We have people from all over the world with a breadth of experience, many working across different cultures. And I thought this is a great opportunity to actually learn from each other. Jana said that's one of the aims of the summit, is to get people talking and learning from each other. So I think this is a time that we can exercise our curiosity muscle and ask, what's a cultural difference you've experienced, right? Just as you're having coffee or talking to someone over dinner, and this would be something you can ask. I've been hearing stories since yesterday, and they're so fascinating, right? What people are experiencing and how cultures are different. And if you want to supercharge that conversation, follow it up by asking, and how did you bridge that gap, right? Ask the adjustment piece as well. And maybe people have success stories, maybe they have failure stories, but either way, it will be a learning experience for everyone and a really valuable chance to share information. So I'm going to share takeaways. Before I get there, I just want to check in. I said that I would commit to you that this session would be interesting, that it would be actionable, and that it would expand your perspective. How did we do? Good? Okay. On the question and answer slide, I do have a QR form that I would appreciate you taking just a few seconds to give your feedback to me and the organizers on how this session went. But in closing, if you want to communicate effectively across cultures, close the gap with cultural intelligence by going beyond respect to getting curious about who you're talking to and adapting accordingly. So whether you're shopping for Irish souvenirs, leading a global team, or pitching a new idea, use cultural intelligence to ensure that you communicate the same message, the same meaning, adapted in a way that effectively gets across to every audience, no matter how different. Thank you.
Your jacket is covering your mic. I think that was the problem. I know. Yep. All good. Okay, we have time for a question or so. There's a hand in the back. I think that mic isn't on.
I can yell. Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Carlos from Global News. I have a question. You mentioned Latin America, but actually, I have experience working with the different cultures we have in Latin America, and they're very different. Mm-hmm. And so we have offices in 11 countries, and we have a management team that combines about 4 different types of cultures that are super different. So for example, Argentines tend to be very irreverent and expressive and like to say no to everything everyone else says in a meeting, whilst the Andean cultures are super reverential. They will say yes to anything you say, and the more northern cultures are very groupthink cultures. How do you manage that in one group?
Yeah, great question. How do you manage that in one group? So usually what's most helpful is to start by aligning expectations. So to set the culture of your group, how are we going to interact? So it's not enough just to say, well, we're going to be respectful of one another, right, which we talked about earlier, because that looks different to different people. So if you're you need to put out values and then define the behaviors that show those values, right? If the CEO puts forth an idea and the Argentine feels like respectful behavior is to just speak up and contradict what he says in front of everyone, and it's okay to have that conversation in public, but you have others who feel like, no, I need to go talk privately, right? You need to work those out and say, all right, so which way are we going to do it? And this is our culture, and this is how we...
I should tell them. Everyone.
Are you leading?
I'm the CEO,
yeah,
and I'm the Argentine too. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm very used to that, having people in front of me who will say yes to everything I say. I'm expecting them to, discuss an idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there are several things you can do in that case. So if you're the CEO, you want to get input from others, but they just agree with the way you said. Obviously, I shared an example about that. But another thing you can do is talk to people privately rather than in a group setting. Another thing is that in more indirect cultures, asking a yes or no question often won't get you the insight you're actually wanting, right? So ask it more broad. What would you suggest we do? And that way elicit their input without just asking a black or white question.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Carlos. Thanks. We have time for one last question. I think Anna had her hand up first. I'm so sorry. Denied. She was like, got it.
Thanks. Hi, Anna Salter, Inclusive. What are your thoughts about the role of gender and age in this sort of area of cultural understanding and misunderstanding? The reason I mention it is that sometimes I'm very consultative with other senior leaders in the organisation, and a certain group of those people think I am seeking their advice rather than telling them what I'm planning to do through courtesy and possibly just getting some thoughts from them. And I come up across that quite a lot. And I don't know if it's about what I exude in terms of my energy or just I'm coming up against some old guys, basically.
Yeah. I mean, gender, obviously, we're talking about half the world population. So gender is a hard one to make generalizations about. So that kind of depends on how you set up that interaction. Like, are you the leader? Are you the leader in this scenario? It appears that you're the leader? Okay.
They're her peers.
Oh, sorry, your peers. And so sometimes it could be you clarifying, or it could be, I don't know what the gender conversation, if you have a gender conversation going in your company, but that would be one approach. But obviously, this is a common challenge that women face in the workplace. And when it comes to gender, generations, we also see a significant difference in cultural values, right, between Gen Z and some of the older generations. And so, again, it's helpful to recognize that we come from different experiences in the way that we were raised, the things we were exposed to as we were brought up. And so, a lot of times people say that Gen Z is just lazy when probably they just have they're not as driven to get things off the checklist. They have more of a balanced lifestyle and a value for free time and they look at their life a bit more holistically outside of work than some of the older generations tend to. So it's understanding those cultural differences there. Yeah.
Okay, I can't deny you. It's your first time at the summit. Let's get a mic up here in the front, and we're gonna make this work.
Thank you for accommodating me here. In some cultures, asking about their culture itself is offensive. So, like, people come up to me and say, is yours an arranged marriage? Yeah, that's pretty offensive. Because I get that question a lot. So how do you learn about cultures without actually asking about it? Is it observation or some other techniques?
Yeah, a great place to start is observation and learning by watching. Sometimes you can ask more indirectly rather than just coming out and asking, do you have an arranged marriage, right? You could ask maybe the story of how someone got married or what's general. Does it feel less offensive if it's a general question? Like in India, is it correct that lots of people have arranged marriages? Does that feel less offensive?
Yeah, of course, if it's not personal, it's better, but still, some things are very cliche.
Yeah.
Right, so I think just for the audience, just how do you know that you're supposed to know this? Or it says, hey, I'm trying to learn, so.
Yeah, and I think a lot is also people can tell by our approach, like, are you coming in based on your assumptions, based on preconceived ideas and stereotypes, or are you really humble and open to learning and listening? And if you really are open, that often comes across, and people are willing to overlook a lot, but it is also really significant to be sensitive to how people feel talking about their culture and how much is private and how much is not private, right? So just being sensitive and feeling the nuances of that communication. And that's kind of where AI is great for information. But as far as the one-on-one reading between the lines, what's the nuances of what's going on here? She said yes, but I kind of feel like there was something else there, right? And so the human part is really significant here.
That's a great response. I would like to speak with you and Anna at the break. I have ideas. But please join me in a round of applause for Kelly. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you.